as you mentioned, Chinese currency is actually one of the few currency right now that's actually appreciating against the US dollar, across much of the world, but particularly in Asia. Rest of Asian currencies have sharply devaluated against the US dollar. This included global South countries like the Philippines, like Indonesia, Thailand, but also more advanced economies like Japan and South Korea. And because all these countries depended on oil imports from the Persian Gulf for one, and and uh, and another reason is the capital has been sucked out of these countries to support the increasingly stratospherical valuation of the U.S. stock market, and so China certainly stand out, and you also point into the fact that the dollar dominance in the global trade system is actually destabilizing. It's actually causing a lot of hardship, and it raised the question why countries, especially when they're not trading with the United States directly, when they're trading with each other, why do they need to use the U.S. dollars when they're put them completely at the whim of U.S. central bank. So this is where I think people are looking for alternatives. Now, do you think the RMB settlement would be able to provide that alternative in global trade to the US dollars?
Well, the short answer is yes. Now, these things don't, materialize overnight, and there's no single moment that sort of heralds, a new world monetary order. And that's largely because monetary systems evolve rather than have these clean black and white breaks. They evolve in part because the economic foundations and the systems that they're connected to also evolve only slowly. So for those of us who have grown up in the age of social media where we expect instant results, this is not the kind of circumstance that you would expect for the evolution of trading systems and monetary systems. So what's been happening? Well, over the last 5 or 6 years, the RMB has been increasing its role as a settlement currency for trade purposes. The US dollar, of course, remains the most substantial settlement currency, but the RMB has been increasing its role. It is now more significant as a settlement currency for trade with China than before. In fact, it's about 55% of trade with China is now settled in the RMB, and it overtook the US dollar only in the last 18 months or so. So the RMB, insofar as doing business with China, is now the most significant currency. The second thing I think it's important to note is that China has developed and has operated an alternative set of rails, what people call rails, or systems that enable the tracking of these accounts, which is separate to the SWIFT system, which deals with interbank messaging, particularly for transactions made in US dollars. And because there are these new rails, so it's the CIPS system, CIPS, it was launched in 2015, there is a growing proportion of global trade settlements that is no longer tracked on the SWIFT network. In other words, they're on a different set of ledgers altogether. So that's the second thing that's happened. The reason why that's significant, of course, is that from an interventions point of view, it means that they are no longer within reach, the direct reach of the American Treasury or the American political class, unlike transactions that are enabled through interbank messaging on SWIFT, or, of course, when US dollars are actually used, which are accounted for and kept track of by the Fed. Because of this, countries are increasingly seeing the RMB as a safe settlement currency, a means of payment, because it's not subject to the risks of being frozen or confiscated by the Americans. And it's also one that makes a lot of practical sense because more and more countries are trading more and more with China. And if you're doing more and more business with China, you do have to ask the obvious question: why is it that the business that we do with companies in China is being transacted using the currency of a country who's not a party to these transactions? So President Lula asked the obvious question, earlier this year or late last year? Why is it that countries in Latin America who do business with each other in US dollars? There's no reason to. It can be done in other ways. China's also been progressively expanding the digital infrastructure to make onboarding into this process easier, quicker, and ultimately more robust. The RMB was launched as trial, and in fact, it's still ostensibly in trial, and I suspect it's going to be being trialed for quite a number of years to come, but it's in real life trial. It was launched 4 or 5 years ago, and with both domestic applications as well as cross-border applications. The cross-border applications are now going to be supported in a few ways. One is for multi-central bank digital currency settlements. It'll be supported through a piece of infrastructure that was developed through a consortium project auspiced at the time by the Bank of International Settlements called mBridge. And mBridge is a distributed ledger-based system where participating central banks run a node of the ledger, and no single bank can control the ledger and the recording of transactions on that ledger, provided that the rules are followed. mBridge went live with a minimum viable product about 18 months ago. And whilst it hasn't set the house on fire, in volume terms, it's supported something like, from memory, and I might be wrong on this, about $160 billion worth of transactions, most of which is actually in RMB or digital RMB. The reason why mBridge is significant in this is because it has been designed specifically to support national currency-based settlements, where country A and country B are facilitating trade between companies in their respective countries, and instead of using the currency of country C, the United States dollar, for example, they literally transact in the currencies of countries A and B. The most recent piece of infrastructure that's been developed is one called CBETS. And CBETS is Shubida in Chinese. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a portal, it's a gateway that in effect sits on top of CIPS, which is for RMB settlements, and mBridge, which is for CBDC, multinational CBDC settlements. And CBETS now sits on top of that as a gateway which enables participating banks, central banks and commercial banks, and also non-bank financial service providers to interact with these systems now through relatively, well, I was going to say straightforward, but nothing's ever quite straightforward in this space, but relatively easy to comprehend and understand technical interfaces. So it will take a central bank, a counterparty central bank, somewhere in the order of 6 to 12 months worth of technical work to fully embed and integrate into the CBETS system, which enables them to participate in both CIPS digitally and also the CBDC ecosystem digitally in a combined way. If you integrate at a lower level, right, with fewer functionality and fewer services, basically, it's a project that could be implemented between 3 to 6 months. And in fact, you could get a trial up and running inside 3 months. So this is a very significant step forward, not because it's a new set of rails. What's significant about this is that it's a new and easier, consolidated, single platform way of integrating. Right. So often with these things, you've got to have an easy way to onboard. And when you've got multiple rails, CIPS and the mBridge system in this particular case, you want to actually have a consolidated single point of view, right? One window. What happens underneath the surface doesn't really matter, so long as your interface delivers you the convenience of a single view. And that's what this system now does. I would expect as a result of that, over the next 2 to 5 years, that the digital RMB will expand its role in cross-border trade. Remember that when it was first launched 4 years or so ago, its principal focus was domestic, but now it is going to become a more significant means of payment for cross-border transactions. And at the same time, because the infrastructure now exists and is easy to interface with and can be activated, the CBDC projects in other countries, whether they're up and running or whether they're part of research and development, will actually begin to be fast-tracked as well. And I'll give you one example. This is probably a bit more technical and detailed than maybe some of our normal discussions, but I think people who are interested in global south developments and transformations of a multipolar world would appreciate the fact that these things are happening. Right? Even though they're not the big headline stuff, these are the things that actually make the transition to a multipolar economic foundation globally possible. Nigeria is a very interesting case in point. And Nigeria launched its own CBDC a few years ago, and it's had, let's just say, modest success for now. Certainly has not met expectations of the central bank in Nigeria, etc., etc. But with the opportunity to interact with the Chinese CBDC ecosystem through an mBridge platform, which enables national currency-based trade to take place, there's every likelihood that the Nigerian CBDC will gain greater traction as a medium of exchange for international settlements. I should also say, and we'll dovetail back, I guess, in a sense, back to the question of Iran, there is no reason why a place like Iran could not make use of this infrastructure as well. We know that Iran has been sanctioned for a long time and continues to be sanctioned by the United States. It has engaged in trade with China, sometimes through what is in effect barter, but also through one particular bank in China in particular that has been set aside and quarantined to handle transactions with Iranian counterparts. But something like a CBDC style blockchain-based system such as mBridge would give comfort to a country like Iran that participation in this particular system protects it not only from, for the most part, from the sanctions of Americans, but it also protects it from the risk of being sanctioned by anyone else. And the reason is that as a node, if they did, right, and it's a big if, but if the Iranian central bank was a node in this particular mBridge network, then its position cannot be overrun by the others. This, by the way, is, I suspect, going to be the fundamental infrastructure and integration points for the BRICS payments platform as well. So BRICS in 2024, when they met in Kazan, resolved to progress discussions around a BRICS payment system. Now, of course, some people got carried away and thought that that meant a BRICS currency. No, that's not going to happen, certainly not for the next 5-10 years. Notwithstanding a few crypto plays that emerged in and around the time which presented themselves as BRICS related. What's likely to be happening is that the participating countries are exploring the technical means by which you can have interoperability between different computer systems that their various central banks operate. And to do that requires quite a lot of detailed work at a technical level, quite a lot of important detailed work at a database schema level, and ultimately you need policy and other related alignments. So you've got to get a lot of ducks lined up to pull these things off. And I think the technical foundations now are clearly there. And these technical foundations can be leveraged. So if mBridge isn't used for BRICS per se, there is no reason why the mBridge design architecture and implementation, which incidentally has been run basically by Chinese software developers, could not be emulated in an environment where BRICS nations run their own parallel system that is more or less the same as an mBridge system, with bridges that link the two together. So there's a lot going on in this cross-border currency space, mainly at the technical level, but it's these technical foundations which will ultimately make it possible for the greater ambitions at a strategic level to increase the role of the RMB as a global settlements currency, reduce risks of exposure to US sanctions, can become real. Sorry for going over time on that one.
Okay, no worries. I hope that give a very comprehensive picture to our audience on the progress on the ERB settlements.